The phone rang at 3:02 a.m. Zbigniew Brzezinski, National Security Advisor to President Carter, picked up in the darkness. His military aide's voice was steady. Too steady. "Sir, NORAD has detected a large-scale Soviet missile launch. We have confirmation of over 200 incoming ICBMs. Impact in less than 20 minutes. Brzezinski sat up. His mind went cold and clear. This was it. The moment everyone had prepared for and hoped would never come. "I understand," he said. "Stand by." He didn't wake his wife. Why tell her the world was ending? Let her sleep through the last few minutes of peace. He needed confirmation before calling the president, before putting the launch codes in motion, before starting the war that would kill everything. The phone rang again. 90 seconds later, Sir update. NORAD now shows 2,200 missiles. Full Soviet strategic arsenal. All silos, all submarines. This is a total first strike. 2,200. That wasn't a mistake. That was the end of civilization. Brzezinski reached for the second phone, the one that connected to President Carter. One call, one sentence. And the United States would launch back. His hand was on the receiver when the phone rang a third time. And that third call changed everything. This is the story of the 6 minutes that almost ended the world, not because technology failed, but because it worked perfectly. And to understand how the most sophisticated defense system ever built nearly started World War III, we need to go back to the beginning of that shift. November 9th, 1979. NORAD Command Center. Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado. The North American Aerospace Defense Command wasn't just a building. It was a fortress carved into a mountain. 15 underground buildings mounted on giant springs to absorb nuclear blasts. Blast doors weighing 25 tons each. Air filtration. Water reserves. Power generators. Built to survive the first. Strike and coordinate the second. Inside, hundreds of people worked in shifts monitoring the Soviet Union. Satellites tracked missile silos. Radar stations scanned the horizon. Computers processed data from dozens of sensors simultaneously. The system was called the Integrated Tactical Warning and Attack Assessment System. Everyone just called it the Big Board, a massive display screen showing North America, Soviet missile fields, flight paths, threat assessments, real-time data flowing in every second. And on the night of November 9th, the Big Board was calm, green, routine, nothing happening until 2:26 a.m. Mountain Time. That's when the screen lit up red. The alarm wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Everyone in the command center knew what it meant. Threat detected. Incoming missiles. Soviet launch. Lieutenant Colonel John Doe, that's not his real name. He never spoke publicly, was the watch officer that night. His job was simple. Monitor the board, assess threats, report up the chain. He looked at the screen. Red indicators, growing, spreading across the Soviet Union. Launch detection, multiple sites. ICBMs leaving silos. His stomach dropped. But his training took over. Confirm detection, he ordered. Voice calm. Procedure first. The system ran its checks. Satellite data. Radar cross-reference. Trajectory calculations. Everything confirmed. And numbers started appearing on the screen. Estimated missiles. 220. Target profile. United States strategic locations. Estimated time to impact. 18 minutes. Protocol was clear. Report immediately to NORAD Command. NORAD Command reports to National Military Command Center. NMCC wakes the National Security Advisor. The advisor wakes the president, and the president has minutes to decide, launch back or let America die. Without fighting, the phone calls started moving up the chain, but something didn't feel right. Here's the thing about nuclear early warning systems. They're not designed to be questioned. They're designed to be fast dot, because in a real nuclear war, speed is survival. If Soviet missiles are in the air, the United States has maybe 15 to 20 minutes before impact. In that time, you need to detect, confirm, decide, and launch your own missiles before they're destroyed in their silos. That's the nightmare logic of deterrence. Launch on warning. Don't wait to see mushroom clouds. By then, it's too late. So the system was built for speed. Sensors detect heat signatures. Computers calculate trajectories. Data flows to NORAD. NORAD alerts command. Command alerts leadership. Leadership authorizes retaliation. Fast, clean, automated. But that speed created a vulnerability no one had fully considered. What if the data was wrong? At 2:28 a.m., Zbigniew Brzezinski received the first call. He'd been asleep for less than 3 hours. The call woke him instantly. His training years in strategic policy, Cold War planning, nuclear doctrine kicked in. Over 200 Soviet MISSILES detected. Confirmed launch. Impact in 18 minutes. Brzezinski asked the only question that mattered. What's the confidence level? High confidence, sir. Multiple sensor confirmation. He hung up. And he made a decision. He did not wake his wife. If this was real, she had 15 minutes to live. Maybe less. Why steal her last moments of peace? Why make her die afraid? He sat in the darkness and waited for the second call. The one that would tell him whether to wake the president, whether to start the end of the world. At NORAD, Lieutenant Colonel Doe was staring at the big board with growing unease. The numbers kept climbing. 220 missiles. Then 400. Then 800. That didn't match Soviet doctrine. A first strike is designed to be overwhelming, yes, but it's also designed to be surgical. You hit command centers, missile silos, bomber bases, strategic targets. You don't launch everything at once because you need to hold some weapons in reserve for second and third strikes. 800 missiles felt wrong. It felt like overkill. Like the system was seeing every Soviet missile simultaneously. And there was another problem. The satellites weren't confirming. NORAD had multiple detection layers. Ground-based radar, satellite infrared sensors, over-the-horizon systems. They were supposed to cross-check each other, but the satellite data was quiet. No heat blooms, no launch plumes, nothing. Only the computer system was screaming. Doe picked up the phone. I need satellite confirmation. Now. The response came back in seconds. Satellites show negative. No infrared signatures detected. That should have been impossible. If 800 ICBMs had just launched, satellites would see them. Heat. Signatures that bright are unmistakable, but the computer system kept insisting. Launch detected. Missiles inbound. 1,200 now. 1,500. Growing. Doe made a decision. He called up the chain again. Sir, we have a discrepancy. Computer shows massive launch. Satellites show nothing. I recommend we treat this as a possible system. Error until we have independent confirmation. There was a pause on the other end. Then, understood. Continue monitoring. But the calls kept going up the chain anyway. Because protocol said, if the system shows a launch, you report it, even if you think it might be wrong. 2:30 a.m. Brzezinski received the second call. The voice on the other end was more urgent now. The numbers had grown. Sir, updated count. NORAD now reports 2,200 Soviet missiles. Full strategic arsenal. All silos. All submarines. Every launch platform. This is total war. 2,200. That was everything. Every weapon the Soviet Union had, pointed at the United States, in the air. Right now, Brzezinski's hand moved toward the phone that connected to President Carter. One call. One sentence. Mr. President, the Soviets have launched. We need authorization to retaliate. And Carter would give that authorization. Because if 2,000 Soviet missiles were in the air, waiting meant dying without launching back. Waiting meant losing deterrence. Losing the ability to retaliate. The entire nuclear doctrine of the United States rested on one principle: mutually assured destruction. If you hit us, we hit you back. Always. No matter what. That's what keeps the peace. The certainty of annihilation. And if Brzezinski made that call, President Carter would launch. Immediately, Brzezinski's hand was on the phone dot, and then it rang again. Sir, stand down. It's a false alarm. Repeat, false alarm. No Soviet launch detected. The system was running a training tape. Brzezinski exhaled. Slowly, his hand was shaking. Confirm that, he said. Confirmed, sir. A training scenario tape was accidentally loaded into the live system. The computer processed it as real data. No actual Soviet launch. Satellites confirm negative. Radar confirms negative. It was a simulation running on a live network. Brzezinski hung up. He sat in the darkness for a long time. He had been 30 seconds from calling the president. 30 seconds from starting a nuclear war over a training tape. He still didn't wake his wife. What would he have said? Here's what most people misunderstand about that night. The story is usually told like this. The system malfunctioned. Technology failed. A computer glitch almost started World War III. That's not quite right. The technology didn't fail. It worked perfectly. The computer did exactly what it was designed to do. It received data showing a Soviet missile launch. It processed that data. It calculated trajectories. It displayed threat assessments. It alerted command. Every system functioned exactly as intended. The problem wasn't that the computer broke. The problem was that the computer couldn't tell the difference between real data and fake data, because they looked identical. The hidden mechanism. NORAD ran training exercises constantly. Operators needed to practice responding to nuclear alerts. So the system had training scenarios, simulated Soviet attacks, fake missile launches, drills. Those training scenarios were stored on magnetic tapes, the same kind of tapes that held real threat data. And here's the flaw. When a training tape was loaded into the system, there was no automatic flag that said, "This is a drill." The computer just processed whatever data it received. If the data said Soviet missiles launching, the computer displayed Soviet missiles launching. It couldn't distinguish simulation from reality. That meant the safety mechanism, the thing preventing false alarms, was entirely human. Someone had to remember to mark the exercise as training. Someone had to make sure the tape wasn't loaded into the live threat assessment system. And on November 9th, 1979, someone made a mistake. A technician loaded a training tape into the live system. Maybe it was mislabeled. Maybe it was user error. Maybe it was exhaustion at the end of a long shift. We don't know exactly how it happened. The investigation was classified. The technician's name was never released, but the result was clear. The most sophisticated early warning system in the world started processing a training scenario as if it were real. And for 6 minutes, The United States prepared to launch a nuclear war over data that didn't exist. The investigation started immediately. How did this happen? How did a training tape get loaded into the live system? And more importantly, how do we make sure it never happens again? The answers were uncomfortable. First, there was no physical safeguard preventing training tapes from being loaded into live systems. The tapes looked the same. The procedures assumed human discipline. Second, the speed of the system made verification difficult. By the time Brzezinski received the first call, only 4 minutes had passed since detection. Satellite confirmation takes time. Radar confirmation takes time. But the system was designed to alert leadership immediately. Speed over certainty. Third, the command chain relied on the computer being right. When NORAD said, "Launch detected," everyone downstream assumed that meant sensors had confirmed it. But the sensors hadn't confirmed anything. The computer was just processing the data it was given, and the data was fake. The recommendations were clear. Separate training systems from live systems. Add safeguards. Require multiple independent confirmations before alerting the president. Congress held hearings. Reports were written. Procedures were updated, and everyone assumed the problem was solved. 6 months later, it happened again. June 3, 1980, NORAD Command Center, 2:26 a.m., almost the exact same time. The big board lit up red. Soviet missile launch detected. Hundreds of missiles. Inbound. The calls went up the chain again. National Military Command Center. National Security Advisor. Prepare to wait the president. Fighter jets scrambled. Bomber crews ran to their planes. Missile silos went to launch-ready status. And just like before, the satellite data showed nothing. No heat signatures. No launch plumes. No missiles. This time, NORAD recognized the pattern faster. This time, they caught it in 3 minutes instead of 6. It was another false alarm. But this time, it wasn't a training tape. Not this time, it was a computer chip. A single failed component in the threat assessment system. A component that randomly inserted missile launch data into the live feed. A hardware failure that looked like World War III. And just like before, the system had processed it as real. Because the system couldn't tell the difference between a go-in sensor detecting an actual launch and a broken chip generating false data. 2 false alarms in 6 months. Both nearly triggering nuclear war. According to declassified Senate Armed Services Committee reports from 1980 and Government Accountability Office investigations, NORAD experienced over 1,100 false alarms of various severities between 1977 and 1,984. That proves false alarms were not rare. They were systemic, but it doesn't prove how many of those false alarms reached senior leadership, or how close each one came to triggering a launch. Most were caught at lower levels, filtered out before reaching the president. What we know is, at least twice, his system went all the way to the National Security Advisor. At least twice, the United States was minutes from retaliation. And we only know about those 2 because they were investigated and declassified decades later. How many others were there? How many near misses happened that we'll never know about? The records are incomplete. Some are still classified. Some were never documented. But here's what's certain. The system designed to prevent nuclear war came dangerously close to starting. 1. Not once, not twice. Multiple times. Here's the part that makes this even more disturbing. The Soviet Union had the same problem. We've already talked about Stanislav Petrov in 1983, a Soviet early warning system that mistook sunlight for missiles. Another false alarm. Another near launch. That wasn't an isolated incident either. Soviet systems had their own vulnerabilities, their own false alarms, their own moments where one person's decision prevented catastrophe. Both superpowers built systems designed to detect attacks and launch back within minutes. Both systems were fast, automated, sophisticated, and both systems almost killed everyone multiple times. Because speed and certainty are not compatible, you can have a system that responds in minutes, or you can have a system that verifies carefully. You can't have both. And in the Cold War, both sides chose speed because they feared hesitation more than they feared mistakes. Zbigniew Brzezinski never spoke publicly about that night in detail. He mentioned it briefly in interviews years later, downplayed it, said the system worked, the false alarm was caught, no launch occurred, procedures were improved, but people who knew him said he never forgot it. The moment his hand was on the phone, the moment he was 30 seconds from waking. The president, the moment he almost started a war over a training tape. He died in 2017. He was 89 years old. In his later years, he spoke more openly about nuclear policy, about the dangers of automation, about the need for human judgment in systems designed to move faster than humans can think. We built a system that assumes perfection, he said in one interview, and then we acted surprised when it wasn't perfect. 3 lessons. First, speed and accuracy are enemies. The NORAD system was designed to detect a Soviet launch and alert leadership within minutes. That speed was necessary. In a real attack, every second mattered. But that same speed made verification nearly impossible. Satellites take time to confirm. Radar takes time to process. Human judgment takes time to assess. The system prioritized speed, and in doing so, it sacrificed certainty. We see this everywhere. In medicine, rapid response protocols save lives, but also lead to overtreatment. In finance, high-frequency trading captures opportunities, but also causes flash crashes. In content moderation, automated systems catch harmful posts, but also ban innocent ones. Speed is useful, but speed without verification is dangerous. When the stakes are highest, slow down, even if it feels wrong, even if hesitation feels like weakness, because the cost of acting on bad information is often worse than the cost of waiting for good information. Not second. Identical inputs produce identical outputs, even when one input is fake. The NORAD system couldn't tell the difference between a real Soviet missile launch and a training tape showing a fake Soviet missile launch. Why? Because the data looked the same format, same structure, same indicators. The system processed inputs. It didn't evaluate the source of those inputs. It assumed every input was real. That's a design flaw, but it's a common one. We trust systems that seem sophisticated. We assume they're checking their sources. We assume they're distinguishing truth from fiction. But most systems don't do that. They process what they're given. And if you feed them garbage, they produce garbage outputs with the same confidence they produce accurate outputs. The lesson isn't don't trust computers. It's understand what computers can and can't do. Computers can process data brilliantly. They can't tell if the data is real. That's still a human job. Third, the people who prevent disasters often do it by questioning the system, even when the system seems certain. At NORAD, Lieutenant Colonel Doe looked at the big board showing 2,200 Soviet missiles and thought, this doesn't match the satellites. Something's wrong. He didn't ignore the system. He questioned it. He demanded independent confirmation. That hesitation, that skepticism bought time. Time for someone to realize a training tape was running. Time to stop the calls from reaching. President Carter. If Doe had trusted the system completely, if he'd accepted the big board certainty without question, the chain of events might have moved faster. The calls might have reached the president before anyone realized it was a simulation, and we might not be here. The most dangerous phrase in a high-stakes system is, "The computer says so, therefore it must be true." The computer is a tool. It processes inputs. It follows rules. But it doesn't understand context. It doesn't question its own data. That's what humans are for. And the humans who save us are the ones who ask, "Are we sure? What if we're wrong?" The NORAD false alarms of 1979 and 1980 weren't the last close calls of the Cold War. There were others. Satellite malfunctions, radar glitches, communication failures, training exercises misinterpreted as real threats. Most were caught before they reached senior leadership. Most were resolved in minutes or seconds, but each one was a reminder. We built a system that could end the world in minutes, and we trusted that system to be perfect. It wasn't. It's still I send single quotes T. Today, nuclear arsenals are smaller. Command and control systems are more sophisticated. Safeguards are stronger, but the fundamental problem remains. Speed versus certainty. Automation versus judgment. We've added layers of verification, multiple sensors, independent confirmation, requirements, human decision points, but we've also added complexity, more systems, more data, more automation, and complexity creates new failure modes, new ways for things to go wrong. The question isn't whether there will be another false alarm. There will be. Systems fail. Data corrupts. Mistakes happen. The question is, when the next alarm sounds, will the humans in the loop have enough time, enough information, and enough courage to question it? Will they ask, "Are we sure?" Or will they trust the system and start a war over data that isn't real? Zbigniew Brzezinski kept his hand on the phone for 30 seconds before the third call came. 30 seconds where he believed the world was ending. 30 seconds where he prepared to tell the president to launch. He didn't know it was a training tape. He didn't know the system was wrong. He just knew 2,000 Soviet missiles were supposedly in the air, and he had minutes to act. What saved us wasn't Brzezinski's wisdom. It wasn't his restraint. It was time. The few extra minutes it took for someone at NORAD to realize the satellite data didn't match, to question the system, to check the source. Those minutes were accidental, fragile, not built into the protocol. We got lucky, but luck isn't a strategy. And eventually, luck runs out. That's the file they didn't want opened. That's the story they classified for decades, because it reveals the truth. The system built to protect us almost killed us. Not once, but over and over. And the next time, we might not have 30 seconds. I'll see you in the next file.